So I'm sitting here. I was sitting here in silence. Sitting in silence is not always a thing I knew how to do. You might think that it'd be easy, but for some people, it's actually not. And I had an IFS session this morning, Internal Family Systems, in which I got in touch with this whole arc of my early childhood where I had a problem, which is that people thought I knew how to do this, and I didn't. And I certainly didn't know how to do it without without harming myself in some way, some minor but still very real way. And I think this is really striking. I think that people often assume that other people know how to do things that they don't actually know how to do, and at the very least they assume that like they can learn kind of immediately, and so for some people when they dive into the deep end of a pool for the very first time, they're kind of able to sort things out. That the challenge that presents to them is not overwhelming. They adapt. Whatever instincts or intuition they have is able to adapt to this situation of being suddenly in the water. For other people, this is not true. And if that's not true for you, then no amount of just being thrown in the deep end is going to cause you to learn to swim, because the situation is going to be too overwhelming for you to actually engage in a reorganization process of your control systems, your habits and responses to things that will give you the skills that you would ultimately need to handle that situation effectively. And the same was true for me with sitting in silence. The nature of my being, part of which could be described as, being an Enneagram 7 who's who has a certain amount of fear of his inner world. The nature of my being is such that in my first experiences that I can recall of people wanting me to just kind of be in silence, this was terrifying. It was scary. It was overwhelming. I didn't know how to organize my attention or how to anchor myself in time, in reality, in space. If I was watching something, then maybe I could. If I had music, then I could. And actually, one of the memories that came to mind, is sitting in silence, not just me not making sound, but there not being some sort of stimulation or something happening. And one of the memories that I found in doing IFS this morning was a memory of a car ride back from my grandparents' place. They lived about 10 minutes out of town. And it was late, and we got in the car, and my sisters were there, and I wanted to listen to music, and one of my sisters wanted silence. And I didn't want silence, and I didn't understand why her desire for silence trumps my desire for music. Although, thinking back on it later, I can see why that is, and we'll get to that in a moment. Actually, no, I'll go into that right now. So there's a thing where if you have silence, everybody can organize their experience on their own, right? And so there's a way in which silence makes sense as a default for people to kind of have, because it gives more kind of freedom or something. I'm not quite sure how to put it into words, but there's something here about exit and voice, and there's something here about it's of the same asymmetry as how it's hard to in a conversation, somebody who's louder will sort of win over somebody who's quieter. They just will talk louder. Somebody who's high involvement conversation style and interrupts a lot will sort of, it's hard to interrupt or stop a loud or interruptive conversational dynamic, because you need to somehow outdo it, and then you're participating in it. There's something about that that's relevant here to why silence actually does make sense as the default. And I understand that now. The issue was, at the time, I didn't know how to sit in silence comfortably. I was just going to suffer a bunch. I was going to be sitting there very uncomfortable, bored, slightly panicked, not at home, not at rest, not able to breathe easily in that situation. And it's so reasonable, right, to think that sitting in silence, you think sitting in silence would be in some ways the easiest thing to do, is you just do nothing, right? Fine. But one is in some sense never doing nothing. There's always, one is an ongoing, we're all ongoing, flowing, happening systems. You're always happening. And so, yeah, it's like where my thoughts, where my attention would go in silence would often feel to me kind of like I was drowning, actually. The metaphor of the deep end of the pool is actually quite apt. And I've noticed that this has been true for me recently too, in times when I've tried to do extended meditations. I would be sitting and, you know, maybe for the first minute or two, I'd be able to kind of, you know, count my breath or follow, you know, whatever instruction I thought I was doing. But somewhere between 5 and 15 minutes into meditating, I would often be in a state that was extremely chaotic. It was like, I would have moments, like fractions of a second of lucidity where I would be like, I'm meditating, but before I could even remember what the instructions were, let alone intend to follow them again, I would just be like underwater again, basically, unable to organize my experience meaningfully at all. And as far as I can tell, these meditation experiences, like some of them built a certain kind of resilience. It's like I went through this, you know, very terrifying experience and didn't die, you know, like, so they built a kind of resilience, but I don't think I was really learning how to meditate in an important way, because I was not able to meet what I was experiencing. You know, insofar as the instructions were supposed to be meaningful at all, I was not following them because I was not capable of following them. And I think some of this might date back to, you know, the trauma and pain that I uncovered today around being forced to be in a situation of silence when I wasn't actually capable of doing so. This has been very rambly, but anyway, so. And I'm trying to say two things with this. One is this thing about silence in particular. If you, like me, are trying to meditate and finding that it's extremely difficult in the way I described, well, you're not alone. I'm not actually sure what to tell you. I've sometimes had a lot more success with open eye meditation because I have more capacity to organize my experience. Beyond that, I mean, try what works for you. And if it feels like something is importantly not working, do something about it. That's a vital part of actually making your own mistakes rather than following some other track and making its mistakes. And that's an important part of the whole kind of meta learning piece, like learning how to learn, learning how to trust your own learner. And that's the other really key piece here, is that, like, I didn't know how to speak up for myself and say, hey, I'm not actually capable of sitting in silence. Part of the issue with that is in this particular car ride, you know, well, and often with silence, I guess, I was not supposed to talk about that. So I was encountering a double bind where I was being told to do something that in some sense I couldn't do. I mean, in another sense I could, right? Like I could, in fact, be in silence, just at some pain and suffering to myself. And so I was asked to do something that I didn't feel capable of doing safely. And I was also being asked not to communicate that. I was being asked to do the impossible. And that's a classic double bind when meta communication is blocked. And so that was really rough. I remember for years afterwards being like, what the fuck? That was so bad. Like, this is, you know, like, I don't understand why silence is privileged over music. Like, I was very uncomfortable in that silence and I couldn't do anything about it, and so forth. It affected me quite a lot, I think. And over the years, you know, in part just through being more adult, more mature, more capable, you know, I've developed more, and also actually by getting some instructions on how to meditate, you know, things like pay attention to your breath, things like, or notice your own heartbeat, or more recently, actually, one of the things that's really made a difference has been something kind of inspired by ideal parent figure protocol meditation, which I haven't actually done very much of explicitly, but one of the things that I have done while like falling asleep or whatever is just like bask in or bathe in love. And there's just this move that I make that feels like I'm just submerged in a pool of love, and it's really beautiful, and it feels really pleasurable in my body, and it makes laying in silence kind of ecstatic. I often do it while lying down, but I could probably do it while seated as well. And if somebody had taught me those skills at age 5, and I'm sure I could have learned them on one level or another, I could have learned something equivalent, I think I probably would have been capable of sitting in silence. But nobody did. Nobody thought to. I didn't know that was a thing I could ask to learn, right? Like it didn't seem like a skill. It just seemed like the sort of thing that one should know, I guess. Yeah, that was one of the other things that came up this morning, was like a quality of shame around like, oh, I should already know how to do this. And again, not an unreasonable thing to think, but in fact, false. I did not, in fact, know how to do it. And I think this shows up for people more than we really realize. So often in schools, people have missed certain sub-skills of the skills they're being taught, whether they missed class that day, or whether it's some implicit sub-skill that isn't even being taught, but you need it in order to do the other skill. And so they fall behind, and they have this feeling of, wait, I'm not ready. This was mostly not me in school. I excelled at all of the, academic stuff thrown at me. But I have since in my life experienced a couple times when I felt like I was being rushed through my learning process. And it was really hard to notice that and acknowledge it and honor my sense of, wait, this is too fast for me. I'm not learning the lesson that's trying to be taught here. I'm learning something else. And the main thing I'm learning is that I'm not okay, and I'm not enough. And people are not going to notice that I need help. Like, that's the main thing I'm actually learning here. Rather than whatever lesson is supposed to be being learned. And this has come to be like when I first really realized my own feeling of I'm not ready, when I recognized it a couple years ago and welcomed it into my being. It's become a matter of profound sacredness for me to honor other people's learning processes in this way, and my own. And it was really cool to have another beautiful moment this morning with the IFS session of going, yeah, I did not know how to sit in silence. I actually didn't know that. And people were treating me like I was ready, and I wasn't ready. And that's like, there's so much love for myself in that. Yeah. If you want, I will make the next couple minutes of this video be a little, if you want, you can stick around. I'm going to do it in either case. I'll make the next couple of minutes of this video be some off-the-cuff, improvised, spontaneous attempt to guide you through a little bit of self-love around this. You can also just listen and not perform the exercise. Honor yourself in that way too. So let's see. Take a moment, get centered, whatever that means to you. That could mean closing your eyes. It could mean looking at the horizon. Let's take a couple breaths. Yeah. So see if you can find some moment in your life, whether that's recently in your adult life, whether that's early in your childhood, or sometime in school in between, where you felt like something was moving too fast for you, like you were being expected to be capable of something that you weren't capable of, and you were expected to be capable of it already, or capable of figuring it out immediately. And whether it's big or small, whether it's something, academic or technical or something more social or spiritual. If you found something like that, some moment of feeling like, wait, I'm not ready. Don't leave me behind. I want to figure this out, but I really don't know how yet. I need something else. If you found a voice like that, you might even try speaking out loud what it wants to say, like the kinds of phrases that I just said, or maybe there's something else that it wants to say, or some particular person that you want to speak to in this sort of imagined scene of the memory. I'll give you a few moments for that. The important thing here is to honor that voice, because in some sense that voice is speaking some sort of truth. Even if in some sense you are ready, you didn't feel ready, and so experientially you weren't ready. You weren't ready for this experience of trying to figure it out. And honoring that voice is part of how you build trust in yourself as a learner, as far as I can tell, which is one of the most beautiful kinds of self-trust and one of the most important. So let's take a moment, and I'll just even speak to you. Hey, you had this experience of not feeling ready. Wow. People thought that you were supposed to know how to do something already, and you weren't, and you needed something different. You needed to slow down, or you needed more instructions, or you needed something else, some other clarity. And that wasn't there. That doesn't mean you didn't need it. And you made it. You're here, it didn't kill you. And maybe you even kind of know how to do the thing now, even though you didn't at the time. And maybe you don't. Maybe you still don't know how to do the thing. And maybe you want to learn, and maybe you don't. And in any case, that's fine. The important thing is to honor that voice that says, I'm not ready. There's wisdom in that voice. It's your wisdom. And if you're in a situation like this right now, again, whether that's academic or social or in a relationship or in some spiritual context where you feel like you're being pushed past the point where it's useful pressure and into the point where it's panic-inducing, then see if you can find a way to slow down. See if you can find a way to speak to that. And if you can't, maybe it makes sense to get out of that situation and go at your own pace. Other people may or may not be willing to respect the pace that you need to go at. But you can always, in some ways, respect it. And sometimes the external constraints might mean that there isn't actually time to go at the pace you need to go at. I remember a couple years ago, there was a crisis in a community that I was in, and I remember thinking, wow, this is so much. I need a whole year to be ready to just face tomorrow, to be like really actually prepared to face tomorrow. I need to just go digest what's already happened for a year. And I think in some ways I was right about that, maybe exaggerating a little bit, but in other ways I probably could have used a few years. So, hey. But I didn't get that year. Tomorrow came after today with no gap in between, and I had to face it anyway. But there was still something really beautiful about acknowledging that there was a sense in which I was not actually ready to face tomorrow. Even just respecting and honoring the truth of that, even if there's nothing I could do about it, was still really meaningful to do. And so that's another option. I mean, not necessarily changing your situation, but just honoring that the situation you're in is one that is moving a bit faster than is really, maybe healthy or good for you. There's no right answers, but there's also no wrong answers. I hope this has been meaningful and helpful. Take care.